What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 15th, 2016. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3, as she likes to do with her unique perspectives on the world. So let's get right into it. Obviously, the big news all over the corporate media is the incident in Nice, France, involving the truck and all those people. Apparently 84 fatalities, 25 people are still on life support. Was an ugly, ugly incident, and as has become the pattern, anytime anything happens, every politician out there is grabbing this incident to push whatever their particular agenda is. Now, French Prime Minister François Hollande said that they are going to go ahead and extend their security emergency another 3 months. So the next false flag will be down there in October somewhere. And they're going to escalate strikes in Syria and Iraq. Yes, we're going to do that based on what happened. Now, again, no matter what happens, politicians always think in terms of how can I use this for my agenda. So let's take a look at what's going on. The driver of the truck was from Tunisia. Another little reminder that immigration refugee program isn't working out very, very smoothly. So how does a gentleman from Tunisia connect with bombing Iraq and Syria? It doesn't really. It's just Hollande trying to make that connection to push a military policy. Now, they're still trying to say terror, 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 terror. That story is actually falling apart. Fox News based the entire claim that this was an al-Qaeda terror attack based on a 2010 article in Inspire magazine, which encouraged Muslims to use cars and trucks as terror weapons. That's it. That's as far as they got with this. And remember, Inspire is actually, like Site Intelligence, a Western propaganda outfit. And we know that because they did a magazine cover featuring Adam Gadam, the American al-Qaeda, who was a total phony. Was Jewish. His real name was Adam Perlman. And he was the grandson of a member of the board of the ADL. And as has become, again, a repeating pattern with all of these false flag propaganda operations, the perpetrator doesn't fit the pattern of being a Muslim terrorist. He's described as a loner, and he was dealing with depression. He was in the middle of a divorce. According to his brother, he drank alcohol, he ate pork, he took drugs, he didn't honor Ramadan. He was not a Muslim. Guy was beating his wife, never went to the mosque. He doesn't fit that pattern here. Now, what is rather interesting is this individual has a prior incident of falling asleep at the wheel of his delivery truck and he rammed 4 cars. Now, the really interesting thing that we need to pay attention to. Everybody's saying he was dealing with depression because of the failure of his marriage. And he was taking illegal drugs, which means he was probably taking legal ones as well, prescription antidepressants, which have a long history of triggering extremely violent behavior. And that's something the media is not going to look at. And, of course, the big issue here from the people of France is that current state of emergency didn't prevent this from happening. So why extend it if it's completely useless? And by the way, I think it was a road rage incident. I don't think it was an act of terror. Because if it was an act of terror, wouldn't they have driven just 8 miles up the road to Monaco, where they would have found a lot of money junkies and elites to run down? Have you ever noticed these so-called terror attacks are never directed at the people who start the wars, cause the poverty, run the banks? It's always ordinary people, disposable humans, bloody shirts to wave for the political agenda. So apparently at this point, Barack Obama is jumping on this thing. He's talking about American flags are now at half staff for these victims. They ought to start putting electric motors on those flagpoles. They run the half flag thing so often right now. Now, the claim that ISIS took credit for the attack has been discredited. The claim of multiple shooters has been debunked, along with the claim of weapons and explosives. And it turns out the second person seen in the cab was actually a bystander who tried to basically open the door and grab the driver to stop this from happening. And finally, that fire at the Eiffel Tower that everybody was screaming about. Remember when I put up that Twitter video and I said, well, the Eiffel Tower isn't on fire. It looks like a fire that's just near it, and the smoke is billowing up through the Eiffel Tower lights. And the French authorities are saying, completely unconnected, a truck caught on fire and burned. It just happened to be sitting next to the Eiffel Tower, and it wasn't part of a terror plot. But everybody was trying to grab it and make it part of this grand scheme, booga booga. And we're already seeing articles in places like Russia Today where the French government is probably looking at a serious public backlash over this security emergency because it clearly does not work, just like all the TSA and everything else in this country doesn't work. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining us now. We're talking about the incident in France. And everybody is pounding on it for their political agenda. The only people who are being left out in the cold are the gun grabbers because this was a truck. What are they going to do? Declare it an assault truck and, ban those? 15-day waiting period to buy a truck? It's kind of ridiculous here. I think it was a case of road rage. The guy was dealing with depression. He was not a practicing Muslim. He ate pork. He didn't go to the mosque. He didn't do Ramadan. He took drugs, beat his wife. Now, Newt Gingrich is joining the choir of people trying to exploit this tragedy, saying any Muslim who wants Sharia should be deported. And again, this guy was not a practicing Muslim. He didn't act like one, didn't pray, didn't go to the mosque. And he did have that prior incident of falling asleep at the wheel of his delivery truck. That was his job, driving delivery trucks. So let's turn over to this situation with Black Lives Matter and what's going on here. The White House actually came on out and said the more Black Lives Matter protests, it's a good thing. We need more protests out there. And the Defense Department is warning their workers to avoid the day of rage protests. But it's starting to look like this is another fizzle. Remember back during the trial of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin? And the whole week before the verdict came on down, the corporate media was saying, there are going to be riots. There are going to be nationwide riots. There are going to be riots everywhere. Absolutely, there's going to be riots. And, of course, it didn't happen. And the media was sitting there with egg on their face. So now we're starting to see indications they may be trying to plan an exit because popping up all over the independent media are these suggestions that, this might all have just been a hoax. And there was an article over in PJ Media saying, is this really going to happen? Are there going to be these massive riots? So I'm sure there are going to be some protests and some marches, but I don't think it's going to be the coast-to-coast firestorm that was being implied. Again, because black Americans and white Americans are smart enough to understand this is how the government likes to play. And people who are my age remember COINTELPRO and how the government likes to turn people against each other. So, let's see. Let's do that. Now, there is one incident that's going to happen over the weekend. Apparently, Black Lives Matter is going to shut down the Rosedale Shopping Center on Sunday over in St. Paul. They're demanding the city terminate its contract with the St. Anthony Police, which is the department responsible for Philando Castile's death during a traffic stop. And that, I don't think, is going to make Black Lives Matter look very sympathetic, because their solution to this is not to get rid of the bad cops. They want the cops gone completely. And demonstrating in front of a shopping center is only going to remind people of what's happened in so many of these other incidents where it devolves into looting. Whoever's handling Black Lives Matter, that campaign, they're not really thinking very clearly about the public perception, because the Black Lives Matter, the public face isn't coming across very sympathetic. Article over in thepeoplesvoice.org, just how much violence will Black Lives Matter commit before they're labeled a terrorist group? Now, the FBI is joining with the booga booga out there saying there's a plot to hunt and kill all police officers. Let's feel sorry for the police officers. They're the victims here. No, they're not. Let's be honest. The reason this flashpoint has been arrived at is because of years and years of the American police gunning down innocent people of all colors, all races, all creeds, all genders, all orientations. We're all victims. This is not a racial matter. It's a police brutality matter. And if you look at the number of police killings in the United States of America per capita versus the other industrialized nations, you'll realize we've got a problem that's way out of kilter with what's normal for the rest of the world. Article out of Reason.com, How Obama Divides America. So everybody has picked up on it. That's what's going on, to divide Americans against each other to keep them under control, at least until November. And basically this article calls out Obama for shamelessly exploiting his speech at the memorial for the Dallas police officers. It's all about Obama. It's all about his agenda. Now, turning over to the political campaigns, a lot of things going on there. Article coming out of RINF.com talking about Hillary's email absolution. And that is not an accurate description. She hasn't been cleared. She hasn't been exonerated. All she got was a get-out-of-jail-free card from FBI Director James Comey and Attorney General Loretta Lynch. And everybody's reacting in shock to that. And depending upon who you ask, Hillary's already beginning to take a major hit in the polls. Unfortunately, the opinion polls are all being run by corporate media or political organizations who have their own biases built in. And if you look at all the polling numbers, they're all over the place now. Because you need to understand something. Public opinion polls do not exist to measure public opinion. They're trying to manufacture it by saying, oh yes, 4 out of 5 people think Hillary is great, in the hope that you will, out of herd instinct, go along with that. The polls that actually do measure what Americans are thinking are kept private. Now, one of the revelations that came out of James Comey's testimony about the investigation into Hillary's email was that Hillary Clinton's staff were marking the emails. They were marking the classified portions. And so there is no question Hillary knew she was dealing with classified information. And again, going back to that email that Hillary sent to Jacob Sullivan, ordering him to strip the classification markings from a document and send it by non-secure means, proves she did know she was in possession of classified information, and she deliberately, with malice aforethought, mishandled it in violation of Title 18, Section 793. That's the reality. Article over at WGNradio.com talking about Dick Morris on why Hillary Clinton shouldn't be president. She'll be the most corrupt president since Nixon, and a lot of people got on there and say, she's gone all the way past Nixon already. I'm sure the ghost of Richard Nixon is out there saying, let me make one thing perfectly clear. I was never that bad. I accept the responsibility, but not the blame. So, anyway. Now, Hillary Clinton is spending huge, huge amounts of money in her campaign against Donald Trump. And she's got a new ad. The theme is role model. And she's got clips of Donald Trump being Donald Trump and selling this idea. Do you want this person to be a role model for your children? To which I would reply, do we want Hillary Clinton as a role model for our children? Smearing and attacking her husband's victims, lying all the time, including to Congress, taking pleasure in launching wars of aggression and conquest, just tossing off the death of the 4 people of Benghazi. You know, what difference does it make at this point? What kind of a role model is Hillary going to be? That may backflash at her. Now, again, as I said earlier in the show, we are seeing some reports from some media outlets that Trump is pulling ahead in the polls. Yesterday they were talking about how Trump was leading in the battleground states. And all of a sudden, 24 hours later, the media's coming out with reports, oh, no, Hillary's still in front. Trust us, Hillary Clinton's still out there in front. But just to give you an idea of how these opinion polls are all over the place based on the political leanings of their sponsoring institution. CBS News basically has Hillary and Trump tied. Rasmussen has Trump ahead by 7. The Economist has Clinton by 2. McClatchy has Clinton by 3. Reuters has Clinton by 11. PPP Clinton by 4. And USA Today Clinton by 6. They're pushing. Here's what you do. Forget about letting anybody in the media tell you what your fellow Americans are thinking. Go out and talk. It's a great topic of conversation. Who are you going to vote for? And just take your own measure. Now, this being a very liberal state, I do meet a lot of people who are out there saying, oh, we're voting for Hillary. We don't care what she did because Donald Trump is mean to the illegal immigrants. But do your own measure here. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, that last-ditch attempt to get Donald Trump out of the nomination with this vote your conscience rule change has utterly failed. The Standing Committee on Rules said we're not going to do that. It would be the end of the Republican Party. The Republican voters would turn their backs on us. So Donald Trump is, barring the unforeseen, he's going to win that first ballot handily. We are hearing, and I mentioned this yesterday, there are efforts to convince the delegates on an individual basis to just go rogue, to break the rules and say, well, we're going to vote for somebody else. Their goal is not to necessarily vote somebody else in on that first ballot. They can't do that. Their goal is to have Trump fail to win that decisive margin in the first ballot, and then the floor can be thrown open. And we know that Mitt Romney is behind a lot of this effort to get rid of Donald Trump. Now, it does look like Donald Trump will be the GOP nominee in November. And I hate to say it, but we need to be thinking about this. The next step will be a serious assassination attempt on him. Could even happen during the convention, disguised as an ISIS terror attack. Now, it's finally been confirmed, although we knew it yesterday, that Donald Trump is going to pick Indiana Governor Mike Pence as his running mate, and immediately Hillary's people are out there screaming about, how could you go, Mike Pence, he's there, he's this, he's that. You need to remember your Constitution. Vice President really has no authority. The Vice President has the job of being President of the Senate and only gets to vote when there's a tie. That's it. That's the extent of the Vice President's authority. John Adams called being Vice President the most boring job in government because he'd just sit there in that Senate day after day after day reading newspapers while the senators made fools of themselves. That's it. What Mike Pence is going to be thinking or doing becomes valid only in the event of a successful assassination of Donald Trump. Now, activists in Cleveland are very, very concerned, even though the Cleveland authorities are saying that they're going to be very low-key about this. The city of Cleveland has literally set up special processing centers in order to process thousands of arrests. It's designed to handle 1,000 people per day. Get them in, do the paperwork, get them thrown into a cage somewhere. And according to this article over in Investment Watch blog, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are warning of violence and terror at the Republican National Convention. They may be desperate enough to just blow that whole building up and blame it on ISIS. Who knows? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to turn to the war zones, emphasis on the plural. We are getting word that there may be a military coup against Erdogan taking place in Turkey. Details are very sketchy. There's a bunch of stories coming out already, but apparently low-flying jets and gunfire are being heard in Ankara. The bridges across the Bosphorus in Istanbul are closed. Yildirim is out there saying, well, it's not a coup, it's kind of coup light, but he is acknowledging there's an attempt by part of the military to seize power. And he's out there saying that he and Erdogan are going to preserve democracy and the perpetrators will pay the highest price, which anytime somebody stages a coup, they've already made that decision, they're willing to risk it. So I have to be very, very honest. My sympathies are with the coup, because Erdogan has done a huge amount of harm to Syria, to Turkey. He's been a big part of this process of shoving these refugees into Europe. So, go get him. More video has surfaced proving that Ukraine is shelling civilians in Donetsk. The bloodshed is continuing up there. The U.S. is continuing to support the installed junta, which the U.S. installed, trying to bring those pesky eastern Ukrainian republics back into slavery, because you're not allowed to break free once we make you our slaves. And they're still smarting from all these people who want to break away. They want to take advantage of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says people have a right to self-determination. If the government that you are living under is not doing the job for you, you have a right to break off and form your own little nation. That's right there in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But for those who are trying to build a global empire, the idea that, no matter how terrible we treat you, you're not allowed to go away, that's according to the rules we just made up. To heck with the United Nations. And yes, as a matter of fact, underneath that imposed U.S. junta in Kiev, Ukraine has become the poorest country in Europe. 80% of the Ukrainians are now living in poverty, according to the United Nations. Every time the United States goes into a country and overthrows the leadership, it is not done for the benefit of that country and the people. And inevitably, the standard of living plunges. They're driven down into poverty because the wealth of the nation is being plundered and looted and siphoned off for American-based banks and other corporations. Now, NATO is making it pretty much official that their entire reason for existence is Russia and its aggression. They've got an enemy to justify more power, more money, more weapons. And they're basically issuing an ultimatum for Russia: surrender to Western control or have a Maidan. That may be a little more difficult than NATO thinks, because Putin has been shutting down all these non-governmental organizations which are known to be at the hearts of these destabilization operations, such as USAID. He just kicked them out. Putin's a sharp man. He knows the game the United States has been playing since the end of World War II. Now, in a congressional hearing on Wednesday, former Director of National Intelligence and retired Navy Admiral Dennis Blair basically came on out and said it is time for the United States to prepare for at least naval war with China. The U.S. is desperate for a war. Every time the United States gets into a self-created economic disaster, they turn to a world war, if not to solve the problem, at least to distract from it, to give them something to blame. Yes, the economy's terrible and you're all starving, but it's not our fault. It's those gosh darn Ruskies and those Chinese. They're there to blame. You hate them. You want to go hurt them, not us. Now, there's a very pathetic piece of propaganda. It's actually in the New York Times. And the headline reads, Iran sticks to terms of nuclear deal but defies the U.S. in other ways. And the article starts out by acknowledging that Iran has gone along with the conditions of the deal. They've given up 98% of their nuclear material. They've dismantled thousands of these centrifuges. But that's not good enough. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm starting to get emails where there are apparently still unconfirmed reports that the government of Turkey has been removed from power. And again, it's not verified, but that seems to be the tone of the information coming in. So, we're talking about this piece of bovine excrement that came on out of the New York Times. And the headline reads, Iran sticks to terms of nuclear deal but defies the U.S. in other ways. And the article starts out admitting Iran has kept their part of the nuclear deal. All the claims that Iran would cheat turned out to be nothing. Iran has given up 98% of the nuclear material. They've dismantled thousands of centrifuges and filled in the core of a major plutonium reactor with cement. And outside inspectors have verified all of this. Even Israel's top military officer was impressed. He said, yes, they've done it. The threat to Israel is now over. But this New York Times article goes on to say Iran is continuing to defy the United States in other ways to try and justify and make up for the fact that the United States hasn't kept their side of the deal. And of course, that is damaging not just to the credibility of the U.S. government with the American people, but it makes negotiations and treaties and deals with other nations difficult when there's a very obvious case of the United States simply not keeping its agreements. And so this New York Times article is out there trying to justify it and saying, well, it's only this one time. And yes, Iran kept their side of the agreement, but they are defiant. They continue to be defiant against us, and therefore, we have the right to just simply renege on the deal. I don't think anybody's going to be believing that one. Story coming out of ProjectSyndicate.org, how Israel is losing America. And it's basically talking about the steady deterioration in the blind support for Israel among the American people, including U.S. Jews, because of the ongoing humanitarian crimes against the people of Gaza, all the times that Israel's been caught lying or using deception to start wars or get other people to fight their wars. And yes, Israel still has a lock on the American corporate media and the government. But the American corporate media and the government can't do much for Israel if the American people are saying this is all nonsense. Now, Newt Gingrich, and maybe he's just sort of thrashing around because he thought he was going to be made Trump's vice president, and it didn't happen. But he's out there now being interviewed in Politico.com, echoing the Israeli propaganda that the Palestinians are an invented people. There never was a Palestine. These are just Arabs, and there are plenty of other places for them to go. They're just staying in Palestine just to annoy the Israelis. And it's absolute nonsense. And so I reposted my article, Israel and Palestine, the maps tell the true story, because since I wrote the original version of that, which was based on the maps, who was wiping who off the map, I've added to it all these antique maps, coinage, Lumiere Brother movies, all this stuff showing Palestine has been there all along. Israel is a master of the big lie, and Gingrich is part and parcel to it. This idea that the Palestinians don't really exist. That's a whopper of a lie. It's huge. And it is a lie. It absolutely is a lie. And I think Israel's getting very, very nervous, because when any one of their big lies comes crashing down, it's going to bring the others with it. Such as the claim that the Ashkenazi Jews, who are the majority in Israel, are somehow descended from the biblical Hebrews, which they are not. And certain other deceptions that we're all familiar with. Now, over in South Korea, protests against the Prime Minister are escalating over the installation of the Theater High-Altitude Air Defense Missile System by the United States. I'm sorry, it's Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense System. To the point where they're throwing bottles at him as he goes through the streets. That's pretty bad. Now, Congress has finally released the supposedly classified 28 pages on the alleged Saudi 9/11 ties. When the stories first came out, they didn't include the actual report. They weren't letting us see the report. We were just being given all these people who were going to tell us what was in it. Oh, it's bad. It's bad for Saudi Arabia. Well, bits of it are now starting to be published, and it turns out it was, in fact, a tempest in a teapot. The report starts with, while in the United States, some of the September 11 hijackers were in contact with and received support from individuals who may be connected to the Saudi government. They even admit further in, it's important to note that this section does not put forward vetted conclusions. It's all supposition. And it's all done to protect Israel and the United States. So I reposted my article on debunking the Saudis did 9/11 nonsense. And remember, the Saudis were being framed for 9/11 right from the start. Even Michael Moore tried to lay the blame of 9/11 on the Saudis. One of the accused hijackers, a Saudi pilot named Saeed al-Ghamdi, was alive after 9/11, and he was a pilot for the Saudi Arabian National Airline. He successfully sued the U.S. government for defamation. And I'll bet you didn't see that reported on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, whatever, did you? But it all comes back to a very stark reality. Saudi Arabia has made huge amounts of money from the United States on the petrodollar deal. They don't want that to go away. As part of the petrodollar deal, Saudi Arabia has reinvested much of that money back in the United States. They certainly don't want the U.S. government to seize those funds, do they? Now, if Saudi Arabia really got it into their head they wanted to hurt the United States, they don't need to fly airplanes into skyscrapers to do it. All they have to do is ask for their money back, all at once. And it would crash the U.S. banking system. The resulting damage would make 9/11 look like a speed bump in comparison, and it would be perfectly legal and moral for Saudi Arabia to ask for their money back, which is why we know that the claim Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11 has no more basis in reality than the claim that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons or that Bashar al-Assad gassed his own people right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors. And remember, originally, they blamed Afghanistan for 9/11. Then it was Iraq for 9/11. So why would you listen to them now? Now, Press TV did an interview with Scott Bennett, who came on out and said that as far as he's concerned, there is no reason to trust these 28 pages, that they could be just completely fabrications. And I absolutely agree, although given how weak the statements are, it is far from any kind of a convincing indictment Saudi Arabia had anything to do with it. Oh, the hijackers were in contact with somebody who may have been linked with the Saudi government. That's ridiculous. Now, Saudi Arabia's intelligence services may have been employed by the U.S. in Israel. They were spreading this stuff all around to try and blur the trails. But there's absolutely no basis to think that Saudi Arabia is responsible for 9/11. It's absurd. It's shifting the blame again, because those weren't Saudis who were dancing and high-fiving while the towers came crashing down. That wasn't a Saudi-owned company that received an advance warning before the planes used in the attack had ever left the ground. And I'd like to remind everybody one more time about the dog that did not bark. And I got that title from Sherlock Holmes' story, The Silver Blaze. And in the story, Sherlock Holmes deduces the owner of the house is the person who committed the crime, because in the night, the dog did not bark, meaning the dog knew it was his master who was wandering around doing things and didn't think that there should be any problem there. If it had been a stranger, the dog would have barked. So, remember where George Bush is sitting in that school in Sarasota, Florida, reading about pet goats. And Andy Card comes on in and whispers to George Bush that a second plane has hit the World Trade Towers, and according to Bush himself, that's when everybody realizes this is a terrorist attack. And what happens? Bush goes on reading about pet goats until it's time for him to make his speech. Now, we've all seen the film of how quickly the Secret Service moved to protect Ronald Reagan when there was an attempt on his life. We saw how quickly the Secret Service moved to protect Donald Trump from that guy who hopped over the rope. And yet, in that school in Sarasota, the Secret Service don't move a muscle. What they should have done was run in, grab the president, throw him in that armored limousine, and start driving in a random direction. Because, in theory, under the official story, nobody knows how many planes are up there, because there's those ongoing drills at the same time. Nobody knows what's a real threat and what's just part of the drill. Bush's presence in the school had been announced in the media a week ahead of time, and there was an airport only 4 miles away. How can you take a chance that there isn't an inbound right there at that moment? From the actions of the Secret Service, it's obvious they know President Bush is not a target. And the only way they could know that is they knew ahead of time what the targets were going to be. And that means the Bush administration was part of the conspiracy to start 9/11, the Pearl Harbor-like event called for by the Project for the New American Century to launch this takeover of the world by the United States. Now, interesting little story coming out of the Independent in Great Britain. A Hillary Clinton presidency would end up letting ISIS and Al-Qaeda off the hook. And they're basically starting with the revelation that came out during this whole email investigation, that the Obama administration and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were smuggling weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda to use against Bashar al-Assad. And there's all these internal documents saying, getting ISIS and Al-Qaeda is of secondary importance to getting Assad. And so, basically, this analysis is correct. Hillary, as president, is not going to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. She still wants to get Assad. Now, as you know, in the realm of propaganda, one of the more embarrassing things has to do with this organization called the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And it's basically a one-person operation. They've got a nice little two-bedroom terraced home in Coventry, England. This guy has not been in Syria for over a decade. His day job is he runs a T-shirt shop. And yet this guy is cited as the authoritative source of what's going on inside Syria. And inevitably everything coming out of this observatory supports the U.S. agenda and position. Even more alarming story out of Veterans Today. The CIA supplied ISIS literally with their own Air Force, with help from Ukraine, Georgia, Turkey, and Israel. It's right out of George Orwell, the government creating the enemy that you're supposed to be afraid of to keep you under control. More information coming out from the Chilcot Report on how Tony Blair justified the Iraq War with child mortality data that was known at the time to have been discredited. The Iraq Child and Maternal Mortality Survey was another propaganda front like Site Intelligence, like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Blair knowingly lied to the British people. Okay, let's see. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call. DJ from Atlanta, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Wanted to make a quick comment and a question. The comment that I had was basically, again, if for anyone who's never lived abroad, the concept that governments could be very dangerous is kind of foreign to a lot of Americans. They've never, as long in recent, you'd have to go back to maybe the American Revolution era to know that that when they were being persecuted by the British government and knew that the British government was killing Americans here, would be as far back as you'd have to live, and no one's old enough to remember that. So, but in modern times, people that have lived abroad in other countries know very well how dangerous governments are, and they're not aware that this government, just like every other government, if you get the wrong people in, will turn extremely dangerous. And I had a question after that if I have enough time.
Well, the reality is, I did an article a few weeks back that we're actually back in many of the same exact circumstances that we were leading to the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. We have a government that's not playing by the rules. We have a government that is looting the people for their own interests and rather unconcerned with our health and welfare. And I think most Americans are now aware of that. There's a really great quote out there, and it's from George Washington. And he said, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. like fire, a troublesome servant, and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to be through irresponsible action. And the Founding Fathers all knew that, and they tried to divide a country that would, devise a country, rather, that would hold government in check to keep it subservient to the people. Unfortunately, government has broken free of that. So anyway...
Yep.
Okay. Yes, you had one more thing, and you gotta go fast. We're coming up on a commercial break.
Oh, sure. The second question I had was relating to NASA, and I know that you previously had worked for them. Do you know that if they were, I've seen several articles and people out there who have researched NASA, and I don't know if you had any firsthand experience of image manipulation or them doctoring images of photos that they take through the orbiters and whatnot. Were you aware of anything of that kind of activity there? And also, what do you think about the recent, snafus they've had with the Pluto orbiters, where they've noticed image, processing and manipulation on that?
Well, there's a large amount of image processing that goes on anyway in order to bring out details in the photos. We've got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to let you go here, but I will respond to your question when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I answer that last question, it's now hit the American corporate media that there has been a coup in Turkey. The Turkish military says they are in control. Reuters is quoting Turkish government officials saying they are still in control. But the dynamic of the whole region is about to change here. And I imagine over in Washington, D.C., they're soiling their britches right now, because the possibility of a military coup increases when one happens elsewhere successfully. So we'll see what's going to happen. Now, getting on back to NASA, there's a lot of image processing that does go on as a normal matter of course, and I'll give you my experience working on Viking. The reality is, as the data comes in from the spacecraft, it can be very damaged. It's come a very, very long way. There's a lot of interference. They don't have a lot of power on those transmitters. And so it'll arrive with all kinds of data hits and bit hits, and you have to take those out. In the case of Pluto, because the image was so dark to begin with, you have to basically do luminance and contrast stretch, and you go through processing to bring out details. None of this is with any kind of an intention to deceive, but to bring things out there. One of the interesting things that happened with the early Viking photos that came on out is that somebody on the internet was playing around with them and discovered features even NASA had missed. So that's been my experience. Now, if your question was leading to alterations with intention to deceive, not in my experience. I haven't seen anything like that. All right, let's see. All flights from Istanbul are canceled, and this is an exciting time here. All right, let's go to Stephen in Oregon. Stephen, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the 28 pages, Michael. I just wanted to point out that Jim Rickards was on Max Kaiser here just recently stating that if Saudi Arabia tried to cash in all their treasuries, they would not be able to do that because America or the Treasury Department is one of the worst at confiscating money around the world and stopping sanctions and all that.
Well, see, here's the problem. Here's the problem. I'm sorry to cut you off because we're almost out of time here in this hour. Here's the problem. If the Treasury starts seizing Saudi Arabia's money without any kind of a justification, then everybody else with money in the U.S. economic system is going to start yanking their money out. That's why that couldn't actually happen.
With that. And also, if you look at all the senators and congressmen that have reviewed the 28 pages, their support for Israel ceases once you can look at their voting record, okay? So there's something about Israel in those 28 pages, I believe.
Could very well be. And again, what is being handed out today could be as much a fabrication as the yellow cake documents or the Downing Street memo. We can't trust anything coming out of government. Got to take a break for station identification. Stephen, thank you for the phone call. Got another Steve waiting on the phone. We're going to take your call as soon as we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. A lot of stuff going on here right now. And apparently BBC World Service has confirmed the driver of the truck in France was on medication for his depression. There you go. Keep showing up time and time again. Oh, no, medicines are safe. You must buy and take your medicine. This was an act of terror. Absolutely. All right. Another phone call. Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just can't believe it's coincidence, but there's been a lot of talk about who's not going to be going to the Rio Olympics this year. And, of course, Zika is out there again. And it just emerges just prior to the Olympics, which is kind of amazing that could actually happen. So I just want to get your take on that. I mean, this kind of looks like something that's been staged. And, I mean, is Rio on a hit list from the United States? Is there some reason why we'd want to shut down the Olympics?
No, but at this point, the U.S. is trying to push that terror thing, and the Olympics makes a great target. It's been used for false flag terror attacks before for political gain, like Munich. So, yeah, and right now, because of Brazil's economic reality, they can't afford the best security. It's going to be very weak and wide open there. Okay?
Yeah, it just looks awful convenient. It's kind of weird how that just happens, and now it's Zika again, so I don't know.
Well, it is, I mean...
Can't believe it's a coincidence. Can't believe that's a coincidence for some reason.
Well, I mean, the sad truth is, anytime any city takes on the Olympics, it's always sold that, oh, we're all going to make money, and it's going to be great, and we're going to have all this wonderful infrastructure afterwards. And it actually is usually an economic disaster. But cities keep doing this because of this idea that, it's prestige. We had the Olympics and so forth and so on, okay?
Yep. Hey, thanks, Michael.
All right. Let me take care of something. A lot of stuff going on here right now. Okay, so let's see. That's the last phone call we have, and we're trying to juggle all these reports coming on in. So basically, Turkey's military says they are in control to protect order and maintain human rights. Apparently, Erdogan has escaped. He is in a position of safety. So it's... It's going to change the dynamic there. I mean, this whole Middle East, Syria, Turkey, Iraq is this fantastic juggling act, and somebody just dropped one of the balls. And I hope the coup is successful, because it is going to absolutely bring to an end all this U.S. meddling in the Middle East, and maybe pull us back from that brink of a nuclear war. Now, turning to the economic news, very interesting story out of Washington's blog. The Federal Reserve is now out there saying creating debt-free money out of nothing for Americans is the next step. In other words, we're going into Zimbabwe, Weimar Republic-style hyperinflation. Now, before you run outside with a basket for your share of the helicopter money, you need to remember all this instantly created wealth is going to be pumped into the financial sector to try and keep things in the green, or in the black, as it were. None of that's going to come on down to you, because the entire Federal Reserve System and the U.S. government are all about protecting the banks, no matter how much it harms ordinary people. And there's something you need to remember. Every time the Federal Reserve turns on those printing presses, or they type those numbers into the computer, it steals value from the money, the currency you have in your pocket. It's like Lord Voldemort waves his wand, and the buying power you've already worked for, saved, put in your pocket, shrinks. This helicopter money is a blessing for the financial centers. It is a curse upon you. So... Turning over to the immigration crisis, and again, the driver of that truck in France was from Tunisia. Sweden is reporting that rampant sexual assaults continue on. It's out of control. They can't do anything about it. All these refugees coming on in, and I think at this point we can safely say they're probably not devout Muslims. They're just people who came from those countries who think it's okay to behave badly. And a survey by the National Board of Health and Welfare suggests that as many as 38,000 women in Sweden, no, wrong statistic. Apparently, a Swedish father was told he and his 2 children are being thrown out of the house they're renting from the municipality because they have to make way for an immigrant family. All righty, let's see. We got a caller on the line, Randy in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to ask you, have you ever heard of a guy named Terry Masson?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Well, he predicted about 9 weeks ago that Turkey was going to have a coup. The Syrian war was going to end right prior to that coup. And after that, they were going to go after Saudi Arabia. So I just thought maybe if you can maybe get a hold of him. He pretty much called it.
Well, I think looking at what's been going on over in that part of the world, I'm not really surprised the coup attempt is underway. It almost seems...
He was in Syria when he reported it.
Okay. Well, I'll try and track him down here, okay?
Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks for the phone call. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining us right now. We're jumping around between stories. A lot of things are going on here. Apparently, there is a coup underway in Turkey right now. The Turkish military are saying they're in control. The Turkish government, whatever's left of it, are saying, no, we're still calling the shots. Erdogan is safe. So it's going to be a while before we find out what the ultimate outcome is going to be. But if Turkey's government has been replaced by force, and remember, this is not going to be one of the U.S. overthrows, because Erdogan was fully on board with U.S. policies in that region. This is a genuine grassroots from the population attempt to take back their country. And we'll see what's going to happen. But it's going to change the dynamic of everything that's going on, not just Turkey, but Syria, Iraq, that whole area. It's going to throw all these plans and agendas into the Al-Qaeda. And as I mentioned before, this has probably got everybody in Washington, D.C. sweating right now, because a successful coup d'etat in Turkey might start giving the American military ideas. And we've been hearing for a decade about just how angry much of the American military have become with that federal government, sending them off to be killed and crippled in wars of conquests, and then abandoning them when they come on back and need medical treatment. And in a final slap in the face, coming out with this idea that veterans of America's wars of conquest are mentally ill and therefore can be stripped of their Second Amendment rights. When you add that kind of an insult to injury, you're going to create a huge amount of anger. Okay, getting on back here. Now, there is a growing problem with drug-resistant tuberculosis. Now, if you are my age, and if you are, you have my deepest sympathies. You remember that tuberculosis was a problem in this country, and then it was eradicated. Was gone. Now it's back, courtesy of this agenda to blur all of the populations of planet Earth together into one formless mass of humanity with no sense of self-identity to make it easier to control us. And the fact that it is spreading communicable diseases is apparently not important. Oh, sure, they'll get sick, but then they have to go buy more medicines. We'll make more money off of these people if they're sick. Now, the problem is tuberculosis is highly contagious, and there's a form of it out there that is resistant to drug treatment. And it could lead to excesses such as government quarantines, high mortality rates. So why, oh why, is the U.S. government continuing to bring these infected refugees and settling them in the United States of America? Because their globalist New World Order agenda is number one. And what's good for the ordinary people, well, who cares about that? Let's grab a phone call. D in California. Aloha, D. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
Doing fine.
All right. This is about the coup. Would this be why Erdogan asked Did he become friends with Russia last week? Because he knew this was coming.
He may have had rumors of it. We don't really know. Obviously all leaders are always concerned about the possibility of a coup, and we know as far back as George W. Bush's term in office that a lot of the military high command were being given early retirement and rotated out. There was a very quiet purge going on of independent thinkers within the military rank and file. There's always that concern. We're not going to know what was going on or what was leading up to this until it's all over. And, but again, both sides are claiming they're in control. The military is saying they're now in control. The Turkish prime minister is saying, no, this is just a small whatever. So this is far from over. This is far from over.
Yeah. I have one more thing also about some of the so-called Black Lives Matter. And also the Chicago shootings. Some of these shootings that go on are also from the CIA or FBI. I kind of like they did the Bloods in the Crips. What I remember is a story that they really started their fighting because of, I think the CIA or FBI shot someone or the other side and then blamed it on that person, and that's how it went on. You think the same thing is going on maybe in Chicago? And
That's
a lot of killings.
Under this economy, there's a lot of crime, and there's a lot of drug crime, and a major motive for a lot of these shootings have to do with turf wars. If you see that those little graffitis that can't be read, the tagging that's going on, that's actually an identifier for what gang is selling drugs in your neighborhood. And when you get into a situation where two different gangs covet the same sales location, that's when the violence breaks out. What is important to remember about Chicago is that it is being held up as the model of gun control here in the United States of America, and yet they have one of the highest per capita murder rates in the entire country.
Right, it would be perfect for the FBI to start, just drop through and shoot whoever they wanted and not for retaliation because they hardly ever catch the people that do it.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now, that basically covert agencies could assassinate individuals and then say it was just a random drug killing. Look at that guy who was killed in Washington, D.C. last Sunday, the computer database expert for the Democratic National Committee. And they're still out there saying, well, this is probably just a botched mugging. Well, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the muggers have already gone home. And
sure.
So, okay. Anyway, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And, it's going to be a while before we know how this whole coup settles out. But it's going to have serious ramifications for what's going on over there. Let's see. I'm looking at some of what's going on. Fighter jets. Social media is now blocked in Istanbul and Ankara. Okay, so that's something that probably the government of Turkey has done in order to limit communication. Okay, new report coming on in. The military has detained the Turkish leadership, and so this is going to be interesting. This is definitely going to be interesting. Pardon me for hemming and hawing here, but I'm trying to look at everything that's being sent my way. Okay, I don't need to bother with that right now. All right, getting on to corporate media. Apparently, Bill O'Reilly, dealing with all of his issues, has decided there's too much pressure now, and he's announced his retirement. He's going to finally step down after all these years. And, if Fox News is desperate for somebody to take over his job, I might be talked into it. Now, speaking of Fox News, remember Wayne Simmons? And he was Fox News commentator. He was their terror expert, and he got that position on the claim of involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency. And that went on for decades, and any time he just wanted to take off from work, he'd say, the CIA is sending me, blah, blah, and he'd just take off and go on vacation. Well, he got caught out, he got arrested, and he's been sentenced to 33 months in prison for that little hoax. And it's just another reminder. You shouldn't automatically trust anything coming out of that corporate media. especially from people who lied to get the job in the first place here. Okay, now then, here's a bizarre little story. This is out of the Seattle Times. Apparently, the Seattle Police Department, earlier in the year, shut down a massage parlor. And then on the 5th of this month, they basically reopened it as a sting operation. Changed the signage out front, had some very hot police women dressed up as workers, and ran this thing out there and arrested 204 men. In fact, they said they got a lot more customers than they were expecting. And by the time all these people are done paying their fines for encouraging prostitution, the city is going to make a little more than $500,000 off of this operation. Now, my first thought was, don't these police have better things to do, like keeping an eye on Black Lives Matter or looking for truck drivers on prescription antidepressants running trucks into crowds? And then, of course, I remembered, this is about $500,000. It's policing for profit. So, let's talk about some of the stuff coming out of the world of corporatized medicine here. This one is really sad. This came out of Natural News. And apparently, at just 17 months of age, this kid, Otto, has suffered a serious illness called transverse myelitis. He's permanently paralyzed. He will spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair from 17 months of age on. His father, Joshua Coleman, got a look at the son's vaccination record and found he'd been vaccinated with 37 vaccines. And remember, nobody has ever tested what happens when they take several vaccines, mix them all together, and pump them into a kid. And we had that link on our website yesterday to a study which showed it is when you mix these vaccines together that you have a greatly increased risk of adverse reaction requiring hospitalization, possible autism, possible death. And of course, when the kid dies from the vaccines, what do? Oh, they claim the parents killed him. Shaken baby syndrome. They throw the parents in jail. Not much of a soul left in our medical industrial complex. Let's grab a phone call. Rocky in Arizona. Aloha, Rocky. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks a lot. Well, now that you're talking about this, I wanted to backtrack as well, if I could, after that comment about vaccines to the Turkey situation. But I used to do some peripheral work for a nonprofit organization that was helping severely, handicapped children. And, I remember the whole thing with Climax, and they'd have the dinner, and everybody would get up there, and they had specialists come in and natural healers and, even spiritual healers. And everybody was very emotional at the dinner then because it kind of all just, like I said, climaxed out there. And I was just thinking to myself, and I'd, lean over and tell my wife, I wish I could get up there in the podium and just tell everybody, stop the shots and we'll stop the autism. It was just, and I was vocal about it to a couple close people. I didn't necessarily know what the reaction would be, if I was kind of publicizing this more throughout the entire campaign there. But I also wanted to get your take on, you were talking about American media and people like Bill O'Reilly. How do you think that the media is going to portray this in Turkey now? In other words, are they going to say this is ISIS? These are extremists that took down the friendly U.S.-backed government. What do you think?
Well, nobody's saying ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It's definitely a military coup. I'm having people who are writing in to remind me that Erdogan had started talking about economic cooperation with both Russia and China. So there could be a U.S. hand in this after all. We don't know, and we may not know for a while. But given Erdogan's blind support for the U.S. policy in Syria, it seems very reckless for the U.S. to try and remove him from power, which would just throw that whole plan for ousting Assad into utter chaos. So, but again, the quality of thinking coming out of Washington, D.C. has not been great in recent times. We have to take a break for commercials. Rocky, thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Fox News has gone back to talking about Donald Trump and Mike Pence. We're trying to find out more information about what's going on over in Turkey, where there appears to be a serious coup attempt underway. Last report I am now getting is that apparently the military are now broadcasting to Turkey over the state media, radio and television. So they're now in control of the media, which is always a major indicator of success on the part of a change of government here. Apparently the military are now in control of the civilian police departments as well, and we did have that one other story that came on out where the military claims that they have detained much of the Turkish leadership, although Turkey's prime minister is apparently still safe and communicating, and Erdogan is, well, they don't know where he is, but they're saying he's not been arrested. So we're going to keep looking at this a little bit. And, all right, now, interesting times. Oh, here's a call right now. Michael in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how's it going? Just wanted to call about this whole Turkey situation that's going on, and it just really reminds me of what happened to Morsi in Egypt. So they completely went ahead and overthrew him. The military dictatorship came in, and of course it didn't come out until months later that Israel was behind it, and they promised Al-Sisi all this goodies, and who knows how much in wealth and whatnot. So I could see the same thing, because now with this whole military coup, the U.S. goes in, now they have control, or I guess control of one of the biggest militaries in the entire Middle East. So that's what I kind of want to keep shed some light on as well.
Well, you need to understand the coup against Morsi was actually a counter-coup in response to the Egyptian revolution that kicked out Mubarak. And we could easily see a counter-coup, counter-revolution happen in Turkey as well to put Erdogan back into power. This does happen a lot. When the U.S. sponsored a coup d'etat against Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, he was driven from power, but only for about a week, and then he got back in. So unless Erdogan and his top leadership are actually executed, they could, with overt or covert U.S. assistance, bring themselves back into power.
Yeah, you're right, and it's still a little early. This is, I don't know, just breaking within the past hour and a half, so we're not going to really know until everything kind of starts getting hammered out. Over the weekend, I guess we'll have something better, more concrete idea what's going on. But I just wanted to point that out, where I wouldn't kind of put that out in the realm of possibility that, you know, the U.S., they're in the business of overthrowing government, so I just wouldn't.
Yeah, but here's the problem I have with that. I mean, yes, Erdogan was talking trade with Russia and China, but Erdogan has been a very loyal supporter, very obedient to the U.S. interests in that part of the world. Now, sometimes he gets a little big for his britches and he makes some very arrogant statements, but I would have said at this point, he's a U.S. asset, and the U.S. does not stage coup d'etats against their own assets. In particular, unless they've got somebody ready to put back into his place that is going to be even worse. But again, we've been hearing about, you know, huge amounts of discontent all over Turkey, and Erdogan had been trying to crack down. So this is obviously, it took a while to plan this. They had to plan it off the monitor communication channel. So this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, you're right, and there has been just whatever discourse going on in Turkey, especially when they had the riots going on. I think it was maybe a little over 2 years ago. So yeah, obviously there were people that were already disenfranchised, and hopefully for the Turkish people that the military coup is going to go into their benefit. But I also just wanted to play a little bit of devil's advocate as well by throwing out that possibility of U.S. maybe kind of just having their hand in that as well. But hopefully it turns out well for the Turkish people, but we'll see what happens come Monday. But thanks for taking my call, Mike. You have a great weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to let you go, and we're coming up on a commercial break. We got another caller waiting on the line, and again, this has just now broken into the public eye. We don't really know what's going on. There's a lot of contradictory claims being made, but it's obviously, this is not just a little tiny riot or rebellion. This is organized, it's planned, it involves several branches of the Turkish military. We just have to wait and let time solve this mystery. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're paying a lot of attention to this coup in Turkey, and we don't know what's going on. It appears to be very well planned, very well executed. The Turkish military are now in control of the state media. They're claiming to have taken into custody many of the top government officials. We don't know what's going on and who the players are, but I do want to call attention to this story that came out about this rush emergency meeting between John Kerry and Russian President Putin, and seemed to come out of nowhere. And maybe somebody got advance wind, and maybe this is the United States dealing with Erdogan, who'd become a loose cannon. We don't really know, and at this point, all we can do is, look at various theories, and at this point, I still think that Erdogan was a U.S. asset, but again, sometimes the U.S. government seems to make some very reckless and counterproductive decisions. So it's too soon to rule out anything. Let's go to the phones here. Gail in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I have access to the Turkish news, and Erdogan has Skyped someone's cell phone, a news reporter at a news desk, asking all the people to come out and to defend him, come out into the streets, and supposedly he's rumored to be headed towards the airport to leave, but he Skyped in. He said that they've taken over all the news stations and radio stations, and so he Skyped this reporter, and she's holding him up on the Skype. So, that's as far as he's been able to get. So I just thought I'd let people know.
Well, all right. Well, thank you very much for that important information, and it's nice to get some information from right there in a close source here. But we're going to have to look at this very, very carefully because, again, looking at this sudden emergency meeting between Kerry and Putin. Who knows?
It is odd.
It is odd. Maybe the U.S. wouldn't be the first time the United States sold out an ally for some other purpose here. But it's hard to imagine the U.S. being able to maintain their situation against Syria if Turkey descends into chaos. And the telltale I'll be looking for is if the coup is successful and the Turkish military ask the United States to vacate the bases that they have there in Turkey. That'll be a telltale. Yeah. And at that point, we can start firming up our conclusions. Okay, so let me see.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Let's see. Yeah, there was this. Actually, it was the one story and the one video about this this meeting. So they're now claiming that not another truck bomb, but a truck bomb has been found near Nice, defused and suspect arrested. Could be a copycat. Who knows what's going on? The whole world is just going crazy at this point. Getting on back to the medical and science. I'm sorry, we've got another caller. Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm not going to have any comments on Turkey. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But if I could please talk about the terrorist attacks, the French terrorist attacks.
Yes.
There was 3 of them, 3 major ones, and the first one was covered up. The details that there was hostages being taken and tortured, and the French government covered that up because it was there was genital mutilation involved, and it was so horrible that if the public knew what was happening, that would just put an end to the open borders right there. And I just wanted to mention that accessory to murder after the fact would apply to the government in this case for covering up hostage torture and murder. And the governments, the media, are allied with the terrorists in this way. And it's just so horrible.
Well, okay, let me back off. First of all, a lot of the claims that were being put out there by people trying to exploit this tragedy have already been discredited. The additional gunmen, that didn't happen. The claim that ISIS took credit, that didn't happen. And the only guns being fired were by the police, and I think that hostage one thing, we can chalk that up to a rumor, because from where I sit, this looks like a classic case of road rage, fueled by prescription antidepressants, and now BBC has confirmed this guy was on prescription antidepressants. And if you go to ssristories.org, you're going to read all kinds of case studies of people who are on these medications who will commit acts very much like this one. But again, anytime anything happens in the world, politicians will seize on it and think, how can I use this to push my agenda? And they won't care if it's real or not or true or not. They're just going to embellish it in order to push whatever it is they're trying to push here. When it first happened yesterday, and I was looking at the video, and I was saying, it doesn't feel like the terror attacks we've seen before. My first thought was it was just a traffic accident. Well, now I think it was road rage. And with so many of the initial claims being made, already having been discredited, we do need to be cautious here and just look at what was really going on. Again, rumors fly, and we need to basically be very, very careful that we don't get caught up with a rumor. And I think the reason for that, this idea that these people were being tortured, being covered up, that doesn't really make a lot of sense either, because, France has gotten a tremendous amount of political gain out of terror attacks going all the way back to Charlie Hebdo. They magnify these things. They embellish these things. And for them to cover this up goes so against previous behavior and character. It just doesn't feel right. Okay?
Okay. I can respond to that?
Yeah.
Just really quickly, a different angles response. One, it does not fit a gun grabber agenda using a vehicle. What should we ban vehicles? Mm-hmm. So it's a sign that maybe it's not part of the New World Order takeover agenda. Two, they should have used a French nationalist if they were going to try to blame this on the people. I know what you're saying. It almost feels like it is natural, just like a road rage. On the other hand, it's very suspicious timing. Like, what are the chances that it happened at that place at this time? Very, very suspicious. I want to make a comment about the Charlie Hebdo. I saw the cartoons. It showed Mohammed with genitals out, ready to receive anal sex. And I got to say, that is completely unnecessary. There's no reason, talk about poking the, for a response. I mean, it's just like begging to have some sort of a response. Give me a break. Just leave their deity alone. It's totally unnecessary.
Well, it wasn't just the Muslims. Charlie Hebdo was putting out these covers that were very insulting to Catholics. And the attitude is this is all protected free speech, but of course nobody in France can say anything critical about Israel or the Jews, or you're going to go to jail. And that kind of double standard, I think, goes against basic French principles of equality and liberty and brotherhood. Personally, I would never have bought a Charlie Hebdo magazine, regardless of who they were lampooning, because it isn't creative, it isn't subtle. It's just flat out, let's try and annoy and anger and insult people, except for Israel. And I don't think that justifies the attack on the magazine, but then I think that whole attack was another false flag to build this up. Now they've had a real road rage incident, and they're going to say, oh, great, we can add this to the pile and have this go on. But again, Occam's razor, when you're presented with a wide variety of explanations for what has gone on, the one that is simplest is generally going to be the one that's true. And the simplest explanation is guy was getting a divorce, his marriage was falling apart, he was depressed, he was already had a criminal record, he was on prescription psychiatric medication. It just looks like a road rage incident.
Regarding Occam's razor,
yeah.
Occam's razor works well. It works well in an environment where sane, nice people are running things. But if you're if you're trying to use Occam's razor onto a government that only knows lies, fraud, and deception, then unfortunately the truth is actually more often a bunch of twisted bundles of lies.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not using Occam's razor on the statements of the government. I'm using Occam's razor on the video of this white truck just tooling on down the road, rolling over people. And the simplest explanation, given what we know about this guy, he doesn't serve any of the political agendas. He's obviously not a practicing Muslim. There weren't actually any guns. It doesn't play to all of these ongoing agendas. The simplest explanation was this guy was seriously depressed. He was zoned out on these prescription antidepressants, and he just hit that gas pedal and held it down.
Okay, and the president of France is now saying he's going to extend for 3 months the emergency powers that were set to expire on the 26th.
Yeah,
so I guess that's not evidence. That's not evidence that the French government was in on this.
No, they're just taking advantage of it. They're just taking advantage of it. But that's going to provoke a backlash because the French people are saying, look, the state of emergency didn't stop this from happening. Why bother extending it? In fact, why even have it anymore at all? It's just like here in the United States of America with the NSA spying on us all or the TSA groping us and stealing things out of our luggage and everything. We've still had, supposedly, if you believe the official story, all these terror attacks. It proves that what they're doing doesn't work, and yet they keep on doing it, proving that Einstein was right. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Right. Okay, last thing. You said a couple of days ago that all it's going to take is like maybe one more raping event in France from migrants or something just to set the whole thing off maybe. And then we have this, even worse than a rape, like widespread mass murder. And so to me, the timing is so suspicious. Like somebody wants the powder keg to blow and I'll let you go. Thank you so much. And so are you saying it's pretty sure that there wasn't this genital mutilation with hostages? Like, I'm really hoping that's not true. You don't think it's true?
Again, the way France has taken advantage of all these incidents to fan up that terror agenda and security agenda, no, it doesn't make sense. Especially if they want to extend that state of emergency, that would be a story they put out there saying, see, we have to do this. It just doesn't feel right. Now, and again, I could be wrong because I'm not privy to the inner workings of the French government, but it feels to me like this was a road rage incident and everybody just grabbed onto it and said, let's use it to push our various agendas. That's what it feels like to me.
And the reason it's hard for us to figure this out is because there's these two conflicting agendas. There's the open border agenda to smear us all together and make us all brown and poor. And then there's also the agenda where they want to have a police state. So that's why there's two conflicting agendas, and so that's why this is difficult. I'll let you go. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. Have yourself a good weekend, and thank you very much for the phone call. There are a lot more than two agendas that are out there in the world right now. There are dozens and dozens of them. Some are very obvious, some less so. But again, in this case, it's Occam's razor. There's a feel to these terror attacks, whether it's real terror or more usually even a false flag. And that there are so many of those elements missing from this incident. And now that BBC is confirming this guy was on prescription antidepressants, right now I'm going to hang my hat on the fact that this guy just flipped out and did a mass ramming with his vehicle, which, by the way, is not unusual. It does happen. It doesn't get a lot of news coverage, but in this case, it arrived at a time when people said, we can use this to do whatever. And Holland comes on out and says, well, we're going to use this to bomb Syria and Iraq, even though the driver was actually from Tunisia. And it's a complete disconnect. But that's an indication they're just using this to push the agenda they want to push. All right, let's grab another phone call. Arnold in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm a real fan of the show. I want to get your opinions on most everything. I had a thought, though, and I don't know if you've mentioned it, but I wonder if maybe not Russia, Putin. I mean, who had kind of a reverse Ukraine thing. And I can see how the Turkish military might not want to fight Russia, which seems to be on the horizon. And there may be a thing there that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that would be a very good reason for the military of Turkey and a lot of other countries to overthrow their government because they don't want to get into a war with Russia or China. That's going to be a real fact, because if you're going to be sent to war with Russia and China, you're probably going to get killed anyway. So why not take the chance of changing things in your own country? Remember, war is when government tells you who the enemy is. Revolution is when you decide for yourself.
Yeah, I'm not so sure there's been very many real revolutions, but that was just one thought I had. Another thought was when you yesterday or the day before, you were talking about JFK and how he changed once he was in office, and I wanted to recommend a book to you called Mary's Mosaic. It's written by Peter Janey, who is the son of Wistar Janey. He was a CIA guy and a friend of Cord Meyer. Mary Pinchot Meyer was Cord Meyer's wife.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And he put together an incredible case of how Mary Meyer was a mistress of JFK, and she was also a friend of Timothy Leary. And after he got in office, she brought him into the peace movement. I mean, she had him, according to this book, had him doing LSD and smoking pot, and they were talking, and he changed, and he evidently was really in love with this woman. She was quite a woman, but I would like to write that book. Was a real eye opener for me, and I think he researched and nailed it right down to actually who Mary Meyer was murdered not long after JFK, and I think she had put the pieces together and was one of the many people who had and was eliminated.
Oh, there were a lot of people who were killed right after the JFK assassination. I remember Dorothy Kilgallen was a very famous newscaster, and she said she had evidence that was going to blow this whole assassination cover-up wide open, and she was found dead, and then 3 days later her partner was found dead from a karate chop to the neck. I mean, they weren't even trying to be subtle back then. All right, well, listen, Arnold, I got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with whatever the latest developments are after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the news here, Republic Broadcasting is doing an upgrade to our podcast server, the one that's at RBN. And so there may be a brief interruption in accessing the show's podcasts after we're done today. But if you're unable to reach the RBN podcast server, it's only temporary. And, of course, if you go to my website, WhatReallyHappened.com, I've just been told the upgrade has now been postponed until next week, so disregard last, and so forth and so on. Looking at the situation in Turkey, we're starting to get more reports from the ground, and of course Turkish media is under the control of the military, so we'll keep an eye on that. I got an email from somebody who said that the story about tortured hostages appeared to be recycled from a similar story that was used during the November attack in Paris, and may not have happened even then. So there's just sort of regurgitating the same hoaxes and spin and all the rest of it. And again, so many of the things that were claimed have already been completely discredited. Like I said, to me, and I could be wrong, but to me, it feels like this was just a road rage incident that was seized on to push various agendas. All right. Now then, getting on back to science and medicine here. There's a very alarming story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Apparently, doctors who are interested in profits are now prescribing sex change hormones to children as young as 12. I'm sorry, 12-year-old kids don't even know about sex or gender. And the idea that you're going to start, let's call it what it is, mutilating them at that young age for the sake of a fast buck. I mean, that is just complete and utter nonsense here. And finally, over in Palo Alto, yet another holistic doctor has been found stabbed to death. Jenny Shi. and this brings to something like over 50 the number of strange deaths of holistic natural physicians, researchers, who've been looking at GCMAF as a cancer cure, and that negalase enzyme added to vaccines, which can actually inhibit your body's natural defenses against cancer. And there's no legitimate reason to do so. All right, last phone call before top of the hour. Carolyn in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. First of all, thank you for the show. It's very nice to listen to the news instead of reading it all. Okay?
Okay.
What I wanted to talk about is about Europe. Europe and NATO are, of course, closely combined. Now, Europe is absolutely exploding as well. Spain, Germany is exploding, France is exploding, Italy is exploding, Spain is exploding.
Yes, I agree.
The Netherlands,
Carolyn,
and the referendum.
Carolyn, I'm going to have to cut you off for our top of the hour station identification, but I'll reply to you as soon as we come on back. So we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me, guzzling her ice water, is the lovely Lady Claire. But before we get to her, I want to finish up with Carolyn. And Carolyn, you are right. All of these countries all over the world are at a flashpoint. And I've been saying for quite some time that this push to create a single global government and a single private central bank to enslave all of humanity has created a political climate in which we could see a global revolution where the people of all of these countries are going to stand up and kick out their private central bankers and other assorted oligarchs. And so, yes, the entire world right now feels like a tinderbox awaiting that spark.
Going on in not only in Italy, but it's a silent one. People just hoard cash. That's one thing.
Yes.
And then there's the Commonwealth splitting off, but that's a big part of NATO as well, and it's a big part of the economy. With the Brexit, the Commonwealth could be is an old enemy of ours.
Well, that would be interesting to have another war in which France is trying to invade Great Britain. Didn't we already go through that a few hundred years ago?
It could happen.
Yeah.
It could actually happen, I think, because the bloc Europe is against an independent Commonwealth.
Well, I think all of these global insurgents.
The bankers are censored. Now, and next to the NATO situation in Ukraine, there's trouble in the Netherlands with the referendum.
Mm-hmm.
We voted against Ukraine, but they still go on. They just accept the terms of the treaty. It's horrible.
It is horrible. Listen, Carolyn, I'm going to have to let you go because we have one more caller we're going to take, then we're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the day so that Lady Claire gets her turn at the microphone. So we're going to talk with Ed in Michigan. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. And Claire.
Hello.
Claire, if you ever decide to kick Mike to the curb, I'm available.
Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And
he's an absolute keeper. That would never happen. We just celebrated in May the 24th anniversary of the day we met.
80 miles from Chicago.
Hello?
But, yeah, I'm here, Mike. Now, I didn't get interested in much of this stuff until I saw Building 7 come straight down about a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, it was just like everything, and that's pretty much all I got to say.
All right, well, listen, thank you very much for that phone call. We're going to let you go here. And yeah, everybody has that moment where they finally see something that breaks through all the illusions, and it's like taking the red pill, to use the Matrix metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And these days, I get lots and lots of email from people I knew a long time ago, and they all say basically the same thing. Man, we thought you were just completely, totally crazy back then, but obviously now you have been vindicated in terms of your concerns here, to which I reply, the two are not mutually exclusive. I can be right about this and still be nuts. You know, great geniuses to great madness near allied, and thin lines their bounds divide.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they could lock me up in a mental hospital, but if I was already in, I would have a real hard time getting on out. Okay, so with that, let's turn to the lovely Lady Claire. Hello, Lady Claire.
Hello, my dear.
And what is your first thing to talk about?
Well, there are lots of things competing for our agenda, you know, to be on our agenda today, but one thing that no one is really taking a close look at. As of Monday, which is the 18th of this month, the BRICS New Development Bank is to issue a yuan-denominated bond in its maiden fundraiser. And it's going to be about 3 billion yuan, or in U.S., $447.8 million worth of bonds, in China's interbank market on Monday. Now, Mike, this is very significant because it's the first time the multilateral bank set up by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America has issued bonds denominated in a currency of a member country. And that is really significant.
Well, it is very significant. It's not the first time bonds have been issued in the yuan. I think Britain actually did one about a year ago.
Yeah.
But it's a further indication. The world wants to break free of hegemonic domination of the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar is not seen as trustworthy in the long run. It's backed by future slave labor of the American people.
That's right.
And they have overprinted those treasury bonds just like they've overprinted the currency, and there are not enough living Americans whose taxes can redeem all those treasury bonds, even if all the illegal immigrants and refugees and unemployed Americans suddenly magically had jobs to go to tomorrow.
Yeah. The bond is very interesting in how they've structured it. It's a 5-year green bond, which raises funds for projects that benefit the environment in such ways as improving energy efficiency and preventing pollution. Good idea.
I think so, too.
And it's expected to be valued between 2.8 and 3.6% per year. I have a feeling that when those bonds go on sale, A, it's going to make Wall Street very nervous. It's going to be interesting to see what the Asian markets do overnight on Sunday. And B, one has to wonder if this isn't part of the U.S. push for a war against China economically.
Well, we know that the U.S. is trying to find some way to damage the ruble and the yuan and remove them as alternatives to the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking. And that's how the U.S. Basically maintains control. They're not creating a stronger currency.
No.
They're simply rubbing out the competition.
Yeah.
They're not trying to manufacture better, superior products. They just tariff and trade agreement the competition so they can't even get here. You would be astounded at some of the wonderful quality products manufactured in other countries which are simply blocked from being imported into the United States of America by some of these so-called free trade deals.
Oh, these include cars that are far better fuel efficient than anything you can find here, but they're blocked, you know. I'd also like to go to an article by Mac Slavo at the website When the Hits the Fan plan.
Well, before you do that, we do need to do our shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network at this time, and we're being joined by the lovely Lady Claire, covering a bunch of stories, and of course we're keeping an eye on events in Turkey and events in France. It is a very, very busy Friday.
Yes.
So you wanted to talk about this.
There was an article in the website When the Hits the Fan by Max Slavo, and apparently the U.S. warships are now surrounding these disputed Chinese waters, where there was the verdict by The Hague that China really didn't have a claim. And it makes a very interesting point. Territorial disputes are a delicate thing and potentially deadly as well.
Well, see, here's the thing. The only legal justification for the United States to blockade those islands is for the U.S. to exert a territorial claim over those same islands. Now, The Hague didn't say that. The Hague didn't say these islands belong to anybody. In fact, if anything, The Hague said they belong to the Philippines.
Yes.
But this is all about trying to get a war going because our government is desperately broke. They're desperately in debt. And the last 2 times they were in this mess, they started a world war or joined a world war to distract from it, to have something to blame for it. And it worked in 1907 and it worked in 1929, and that's why there's this big rush.
Yeah, and now there is not only an escalation, but an acknowledgement on both sides of the Pacific that things are actually heading toward a shooting war. And it's being discussed in very stark terms. Now, Mike, call me silly, but one does not create an atmosphere conducive to negotiations by surrounding a contested sea region with military hardware.
Easy on those plosives.
Yes, even to the point of sending a guided missile destroyer there, which Obama did several months ago to see if China would respond.
Now, they want a war with probably more with China than Russia at this particular point with developments in Turkey.
Yeah.
But the trick is always to make it look like the other guy started it or provoked it somehow. And I need to break into your story here. We're getting an update here. Apparently, Erdogan is in the air. He has fled Turkey. He requested asylum in Germany, and they denied him permission to land.
Oops.
This may be the only refugee Germany has refused.
Oh, my goodness. My goodness. Yeah, that's very strange.
Oh, man, oh, man.
Yeah. And also, China is kind of, how can I say this gently, very negative toward Japan at a conference in Mongolia and telling Japan to stop interfering in the South China Sea as well. And it has reacted very angrily for calls by Western countries in Japan that the decision The Hague came to be adhered to. And, but I mean, from the end of World War II, China has been ceded those territories. Am I not correct, Mike?
Well, you're talking about the Cairo.
The Cairo, yes.
Yeah, the Cairo Convention. Yeah. That's a treaty that was signed by all these countries, including the United States, saying, yes, these islands belong to China. But again, as the United States has more recently demonstrated with Iran, any treaties signed by the U.S. government aren't worth the paper they're printed on.
Yeah, unfortunately. Now, we had a development yesterday in Moscow, which may well be related to the Turkey coup. Unable to stop Syria's war, U.S. offers Russia a new partnership. And apparently there was a meeting between Putin and Kerry yesterday, hoping that the attraction of a unified campaign against the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda would end in a sort of partnership between the U.S. and Russia.
Well, I'd be very careful about that one because the U.S. agenda, I mean, based on State Department documents that have been leaked out, the U.S. agenda is still getting rid of Assad.
Regime change.
And, by the way, I'm seeing another report here that apparently Erdogan's recent negotiations with Putin didn't actually go very well, and that in point of fact he actually damaged his ties with Russia.
Oh dear!
But with some of his arrogance, his own big mouth. I mean, we've seen that in recent headlines where he has an overinflated sense of himself as Sultan of the Middle East.
Yeah. And you know, it would be nice to see this right now. I don't know that I'd bet on it. The collaboration between the U.S. and Russia.
I'm sure
Syria.
Putin understands it's, this is the U.S. trying to take the moral and ethical high ground, trying to reinforce the idea that they're after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But we all know the U.S. government, the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton's State Department, were arming and supplying all of these rebel groups, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, as an instrument to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. They've been doing this for 5 years, and they're thrashing around hopelessly on this situation.
And, you know, it's like that old classical definition of insanity. You keep doing something exactly the same way, yet expecting a different outcome. And by arming these alleged moderate jihadists, they're not getting anywhere. And they most probably won't. I'd like to also take a look at Iran right now. This is an article by Stephen Lenman from Global Research. And Stephen is one of my peace and justice heroes in this world. Apparently, U.S. hostility toward Iran has not abated at all, and billions of dollars of Iranian assets remain frozen. And Tehran is wrongfully blamed for regional terrorism and elsewhere, and Congress earlier passed legislation authorizing Iranian assets to be used to compensate victims of Israeli Mossad terrorism, wrongly blamed on the Islamic Republic. And in April of this year, our own Supreme Court shamelessly ruled that Tehran must pay families of victims and survivors nearly $2 billion in compensation, including victims of other attacks wrongfully linked to Iran.
See, that's the thing about this decision. Okay, the Supreme Court said Iran could be made to pay for terror attacks even in the absence of any proof that Iran had anything to do with it at all.
Right.
That's like me getting mugged on my way home from the supermarket, and then the court telling me that the people in the neighboring condo have to pay for my medical bills. It doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever.
The only way that it makes sense is the degree to which U.S. foreign policy is still dictated by the Israeli government.
Yes, and Newt Gingrich showed that one more time earlier today here.
Yeah.
I want to insert something here, Chris. Somebody just sent me a screen capture from Google News, where they're covering Turkish military has taken over, and on the same page are two older stories. One from The Economist, Turkey is suddenly making friends, not enemies, and then another story from back on the 13th, where Turkey hints at normalization of ties with Syria. Of course, there was that rapprochement with Israel, in which Turkey apologized for the Mavi Marmara. Turkey had apologized to Putin about the shoot down of the Russian plane here. So maybe he had started to basically go his own way, and that's the reason for this coup d'etat, which means it could very well be an American intervention. But they had to have Turkey's military heavily penetrated in order to pull this off.
And primed. And yeah, that's really kind of amazing news. How long has Turkey been a representative democratic country? For quite some time. I mean, from the time of Ataturk, right?
Well, in theory, yes.
Yeah.
But as we have just discovered here in the United States of America this last primary season, we have the illusion of a democratic representative government, but we don't have the reality. And the same is probably true also in Turkey, where they go through this whole thing about elections, but in the end it's the same entrenched power that always seems to be in control.
I would like to go over to a statement made by Tony Blair's former propagandist. And he's quoted as saying, referendums are dangerous in a parliamentary democracy. I read that, and, I just scratched my head. Campbell is clearly enraged that the British people have had the audacity to vote against the wishes of the establishment, and his remarks are the epitome of elitist thinking, which holds that ordinary people are too stupid to make important decisions on their own.
Well, we saw a lot of articles about that in the British press about, you should just trust your parliament, to do. And we saw these articles over here in the U.S. about how we suffer from too much democracy. We've got to really pull back on that. Because the country would run much more smoothly if you just let us make all the important decisions and you just do what you're told and give us your money and your children for the wars and everything will just be hunky-dory.
Well, that hunky-dory has not been playing out too well with recent years.
No, it doesn't work very well for the people.
Yeah.
And, again, when you have a ruling class that is allowed to rule without checks and balances, they're always going to bias the system in their own favor. And you only need to look at the incredible wealth of our political leadership, like the Clintons, to understand that.
And Pelosi and her husband and all the deals that she has generated for him. There was another very excellently written article, very thoughtful article, and you get these a lot in a website called globalresearch.ca, which is from Canada. Now, there are areas where Mike and I kind of agree to disagree with the people who write and post in this particular outlet. But it talks about the U.S.-led militarization of South Asia, China, Russia, and North Korea, and Iran. And it goes on to say that these are all targets in a Pentagon World War III scenario. Now, Mike, looking at what's going on and what has been going on and the terrible way in which things have been playing out, it's painfully apparent to me that the folks in Foggy Bottom, Reed, D.C., have collectively lost their reality license to believe that they can simultaneously take on all of these countries. China will come to the aid of North Korea, Russia will come to the aid of Iran if attacked, and China will come to the aid of Russia if attacked, and the converse is true. And what is completely confounding to me is how all the players at the Pentagon, State Department, Congress, and White House believe that there can be a successful outcome to these wars when the U.S. military doesn't have the weaponry, the troop strength, the manufacturing, or the money to ensure a successful outcome. This is utter madness writ large.
Okay, we have to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we've got some more information about what's going on in Turkey and Erdogan. These are interesting times. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're following the situation over there in Turkey. The military says they've seized power. Erdogan has left the country. Elvis has left the building. Was turned away by Germany, amazingly enough. Latest word I'm getting is that the Erdogan plane was allowed to refuel in Tehran, and now he's on his way to Qatar. So he's on his way down there. Now, there's a new take on this coup, basically saying that if you understand the Turkish military, you understand one of the driving forces here. And that's because for decades and decades, the Turkish military ensured no Islamic fundamentalists could impose their will on Turkey, which had been a secular state. Whenever anyone tried, they were deposed. Now, remember, Erdogan imposed an Islamic fundamentalist rule over Turkey, suspended free speech and journalism, and basically started to crush democracy. And then, of course, he had that campaign to support ISIS in Syria, destabilizing the entire region. And that may be a driving force behind events in Turkey right now. So we're going to keep, while Claire's talking, I'm going to be searching all the news sources and try and stay on top of this thing. Claire?
Unfortunately, it appears that Yemen is sliding closer toward famine as frozen bank funds curb food imports. And many of the areas inside Yemen are now very close to that condition because importers are unable to buy new food stocks from abroad, as over 200 million is stuck in banks due to the civil war disruption. Western banks have already cut credit lines for traders shipping food to Yemen, fearing that they would not be repaid due to the security chaos. And now, because the financial system is so fragile, they are increasingly unwilling to offer letters of credit which guarantee sellers will be paid on time. And this is really nasty. There are as much as 260 million held in foreign currencies in Yemenite banks that cannot be transferred because the relationship with Western banks have completely broken down. Mike, I have to wonder if these frozen funds are a part of the U.S.-Saudi plan to starve the people of Yemen into submission.
That's exactly what it is.
And acceptance of the former U.S. Yemenite thug al-Hadi. Unfortunately, starvation and siege are not new tactics in human history, and I think history is repeating itself.
That's what's wrong with history.
Yeah.
Okay. Russia Today is reporting a new statement from the Turkish military. Mm-hmm. Power was seized due to autocratic rule and terrorism. And apparently there's now reports of the army presence and gunfire in Ankara. Mm-hmm. So this is definitely... This feels too big and too organized to be some kind of an outside Maidan.
Yeah,
it
really does.
This is starting to feel very organic.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you. I'd like to go over to Iraq, where the Prime Minister is...
I don't think that's a good idea right now.
Well, no, metaphorically.
Oh,
Iraq warns public against joining illegal protest. The Iraqi security forces issued a statement today on the eve of planned protests in the city of Baghdad, warning that the protest is unauthorized and subsequently illegal, threatening to deal with anyone armed as a terrorist threat. And that follows statements earlier this week by Prime Minister Abadi, insisting that the war on terror is an historic responsibility and that protesters should leave them alone to focus on the war. His office has made similar statements in advance of other recent protests. Now, Baghdad has been facing major Friday protests off and on for months, with demonstrators desperately seeking major reforms, including the replacement of current cabinet with technocrats as a way to try to get a handle on the nation's corruption woes.
Well, you need to remember, the current government of Iraq was the one imposed on them by the United States.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And what we're looking at here is a near failed state situation in Iraq, courtesy of the U.S. invasion and occupation. Now, what's really interesting is the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr is organizing the Iraqi people against the powerlessness and corruption of the al-Abadi regime, and we may just see another government topple, and which will then feature al-Sadr or one of his people as its presidents. And this, coupled with the collapse in Turkey, has got to be one of the administration's most nightmare scenarios. But if it happens...
Can you imagine the U.S. government trying to sell us on yet another invasion of Iraq?
Oh, please,
We just got done with that. What's wrong with you people?
No.
We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show now. I'm looking at a story from the Wall Street Journal from last May. And it makes it very clear that the Turkish military and Erdogan have been on a collision course for a very long time. So this coup is not something that was just cooked up in the last week or so in a meeting with Kerry and Putin. And basically it's talking about how the military has been marginalized methodically by Erdogan over 13 years. And Erdogan's attempts to consolidate power were of concern to a lot of people inside the country, because back there in the spring, he forced out his handpicked prime minister, and there was a big power struggle, and the Turkish military were opposed to sending troops into Syria. They were opposed to this campaign against the Kurds, and concerned that Erdogan's actions, his draconian moves, were damaging Turkey's geopolitical relations with other countries deemed to be their friends. So based on this article I'm seeing here in the Wall Street Journal from May 15th, 2016, it looks like this has been building for a very, very, very long time. Okay, Claire?
Yes. I'd like to take a look at a lawsuit that the White House is trying desperately to dodge by arguing that funding makes war legal. And apparently there was a lawsuit filed earlier this year charging President Barack Obama with waging an illegal war against the Islamic State, or ISIS, was met last Tuesday with a motion from the Obama administration asking the court to dismiss it. In its motion to dismiss, the administration argues that congressional funding for the war amounts to congressional approval for it. And the lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court by Captain Nathan Michael Smith, an intelligence official stationed in Kuwait in May. And he had been assigned to work for Operation Inherent Resolve, which is the administration's name for the nebulous conflict against the terrorist group ISIS. Well, Congress collectively has behaved on this issue as though it was completely void of male attributes regarding the authorization of the use of force. And Mike, am I correct that only Congress can declare war?
That's right. Yeah. The only legal way to have a war is for Congress to literally declare war, a declaration of war. They can't just say authorization or funding or the rest of it. It's under the Constitution, there must be a formal declaration of war. Now, under the War Powers Act, the President is allowed on his own authority to deploy the military to a crisis zone for, I think, 60 days. 60 days, yeah. 60 days, yeah. After which he has to go before Congress and present his case. If Congress does not approve, the President has to recall the troops. Now, the War Powers Act was put together at a time when it was going to take certain fixed amounts of time for Congress to get together to be able to debate the merits of the war. In this day of instant global communication, I'm not sure it even has that merit. and I think the War Powers Act could be cut to as short as 2 weeks. Go in, deal with the crisis. You've got 2 weeks to talk to Congress. But you cannot have a prolonged war under any name without an official declaration of war from Congress. But the last official declaration of war by the U.S. Congress was, I think, World War II.
I think you're absolutely
and
right.
Every other military intervention since then has been illegal, and they sell it with all these euphemisms. It's a police action. It's a humanitarian intervention.
Right.
It's this and it's that.
Yeah.
You know, to the people on the ground who are catching the bullets and seeing their homes blown up, it sure looks like a war to them.
Yeah. And we have to really be clear here. ISIS has been trained, funded, and allowed to fester, courtesy of U.S. foreign policy, and used to terrify the American people of what will happen if the U.S. government is not in control of the assets of foreign countries it wants to control, like Iraq's oil, Afghanistan's mineral resources, pipelines, and opium. And if what you see in terms of U.S. foreign policy appears to be a foreign policy engineered to create perpetual war, Mike, that's it.
Well, remember that Project for the New American Century was a policy group that advocated literally 100 years of war by the United States against the rest of the world. Their attitude was, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States is the only remaining superpower. Let's go out and act like one and make the rest of the world our slaves.
Yeah.
And they've gotten bogged down. The plan to shackle the Middle East oil to the U.S. dollar that was leaked by General Wesley Clark, that plan was supposed to end in 2008 with the conquest of Iran. And here we are, 2016. The U.S. is bogged down hopelessly in Afghanistan. They're bogged down hopelessly in Iraq. They're bogged down in Yemen. They're bogged down in Libya. They still can't get any traction inside Syria, let alone getting into Iran. And so the agenda, the policy's in serious, serious trouble.
Yeah.
And now it looks like some of the U.S. government's enablers in the region are now being driven from power.
That could happen with, that has happened with Erdogan. It may happen with Iraq as well.
Could very easily happen with Iraq.
Yeah. I'd like to take a look at a couple of things a little bit closer to home. 6 of 7 remaining Obamacare co-ops are on the brink of failure. They're still in operation, but they're currently on corrective action plans, according to an official from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The Illinois Department of Insurance announced this week that it was requesting an order of rehabilitation for the state's Land of Lincoln Health Co-op because of its unsustainable financial position. The co-op was originally awarded $160.2 million by CMS, and this closing announcement has brought the number of failed co-ops for health from 15 to 16. Kevin Cunahan, who is a top official for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, told lawmakers on Wednesday that of the 7 co-ops that are still in operation, 6 have had to been placed on corrective action plans. Co-ops are flagged for these plans when agencies have identified issues within the co-op's finances, operations, management, or legal processes. And Mike, it looks to me like this program is going to be yet another of Obama's epic fail legacies. I mean, the program was never sustainable in the first place.
No, it never was.
Yeah.
It was poorly designed, poorly implemented. But again, when you live under a government that cannot ever admit failure or mistake, they keep pushing and pushing something that doesn't work until it turns into a complete disaster.
Yeah. And when these remaining co-ops go under, I mean, the people who've been insured through them are going to be in a world of hurt, especially if they've got pre-existing conditions. You know, that is really going to cause these people to suffer.
Well, what's going to cause them to suffer is the fact that these sky-high insurance premiums, nobody can afford them.
Yeah.
Coupled with the sky-high deductibles, there have actually been studies showing that you're actually going to spend less money just paying cash for your own medical treatment and not having the health insurance policy anyway. And so a lot of people can't afford the insurance. They're being penalized by the IRS for not buying what they're being told to buy, even though what they're being told to buy is absolute, complete junk, just like vaccines and GMO.
Yeah.
But when you live under fascism, that's the sort of thing that happens. Companies produce terrible products. They then lobby the government to make them mandatory, and you're stuck having to deal with the aftermath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The other issue, and I think here the Huffington Post deserves a little bit of a tip of the hat. I disagree with them many times, but they did a project on the reality that in this last year, 811 people have died in American jails in the year Sandra Bland
And we're
died.
not talking about old age.
No, we're not. No. And what they did a research project, causes of death, dates of arrest and death, and other data from more than 800 people who died in jails and police lockups. And apparently this information is very difficult to come by because of how it's reported or if it's not reported. For example, Texas will collect information from counties but not from municipalities. Others, like Louisiana, only track deaths of inmates in state custody, and that's a tiny fraction of the jail population. These numbers are horrific, Mike. How can it possibly be that 811 people have died in American jails that we know about in the last year? And to me, it's a slamming indictment of everything that's wrong with the American penal system.
Well, I guess if the police can't murder you out there in the streets, they'll just murder you once you're inside custody, because we've seen these videos that come on out where the police will just take people and slam them into the cement.
Yeah.
And they're being taught to do this. They're being sent to classes that teach them how to be a brutal force for repression.
Yeah.
And so it is by design.
And one of the things I would encourage all of our audience to see, if they have not, and even if you're not a Michael Moore fan, please see the documentary, Who Do We Invade Next? Because it has a number of examinations of European prison systems and how they're run and how low the recidivism is, or how fewer times people come and go back and reoffend and go back to prison, because the European model is totally rehabilitation. But in the American system, it's almost engineered to create recidivism, which is a really lousy way to go.
Well, it's a great way to go if, in point of fact, you are running a prison industrial complex.
Yes, that does the labor.
Which is exactly what the United States is doing. When Janet Reno was Attorney General, she had a plaque in her office that all the furniture in her office was made by prison convicts.
And it read, proudly made by convict labor.
That was basically it.
Yep.
And if you really think about it, prison industries have become big business here in the United States of America to the point where there's actually an economic incentive for the police to find and arrest people. Because if the jails, if those prison factories are not kept full enough by the police, then there are financial penalties for the cities that contract with them.
Right.
So they're saying, oh, we're running out of people. Oh, we'll go on out and arrest somebody for littering and claim you resisted arrest, and we'll send them on over there. We need to arrest people who know how to assemble washing machine motors or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you really think about it, this is a modern recreation of those slave labor factories the Nazis had.
Yep.
It's here in the United States of America.
And right now.
Right now.
And as we're talking about police, apparently police are stepping up arrests for threatening social media posts in the wake of the Dallas shooting. Police departments are now arresting people for threatening social media posts.
The problem is threat is a very gray term.
Yeah.
And we've heard some of these police come on out and say merely siding with Black Lives Matters. It makes the police feel threatened. And so we've reached a stage where freedom of speech is now subject to arrest.
Yeah.
Just like they had in Erdogan's Turkey not too long ago.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
My goodness.
And I would like to hope that people with a modicum of sense will not do this, because Facebook is being constantly surveilled by the police in order to bring charges against people who allegedly threaten in this manner. And the problem is these threats are not going to change the behavior on the part of police departments. That is going to take hard work. It's going to take pushing back against the aggression and oppression. That will take a lot of community, faith leaders, community leaders, police leaders working together to make a difference. And try to restore some trust in this institution, but right now they have no trust.
Well, if they're going out and arresting Facebook posters for things that make them feel threatened, then very clearly there is no intention to try and reverse the trend toward police brutality.
No.
They're trying to resell the police as helpless victims who have a right to shoot people on sight because of the extreme risk imposed on them. It's a situation that is guaranteed to escalate out of control on both sides.
Yeah. And we're going to have some demonstrations over this weekend. I haven't seen a word. Now, what time is it on the East Coast?
It is now basically, it's just about 6 in the evening. So some of those Black Lives Matter protests were supposed to be starting up, and I'm not hearing a word about any of them.
I am not hearing a word about any of them either.
Yeah, well, it's not like the news doesn't have other things.
Right.
So let me just do a search here, and doesn't seem to be anything out there right now.
Zero zip?
Not yet. Of course, I'm sure the corporate media is focusing on, the 28 pages blame Saudi Arabia for 9/11, and they're all covering what's going on out there in Turkey.
And of course this thing about Saudi Arabia comes out on a Friday news dump.
Well, the reason is everybody wants to say these 28 pages prove Saudi Arabia's guilt, but if you actually look at what they're reporting, they're basically saying possible, maybe, could have, might be. But it's trying to point you away from Israel and the U.S. government, who the evidence overwhelmingly points to them as the perpetrators of this war-starting hoax.
So hopefully, I'm hoping and praying that things remain relatively quiet in this country and that there are no flashpoints. But it's still a little bit too early to say.
All right, well, listen, I'm looking out here. I'm not seeing anything happen.
Wow.
And again, the parallel I would like to draw is when George Zimmerman went on trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin. The whole week before the verdict came out, the corporate media was telling us there were going to be nationwide riots, there was going to be violence, there was going to be all this kind of stuff. And it didn't happen because black Americans and white Americans are both smart enough to understand the government's divide and conquer tactics. People of my age remember how it was all done back in the 1960s with the Black Panther coloring book and all the rest of it. And after the Zimmerman thing, there were a couple of staged photos to make it look like there was some kind of civil unrest. One of the ones that just was laughingly funny is they had a black guy with a trash can, obviously just bought brand new from the hardware store, had never seen garbage in it, hurling it through a store window, and behind him were the city trash bins that were bolted to the cement. So this guy had to bring this thing with him. It was an obvious staged shot. Well, like I said, earlier today we started seeing this feed coming on out about how, maybe this was all just a hoax. And, I think it fizzled. I think they wanted to try and get, race riots going again, and once again they fell flat on their face.
Because
and that's good.
American people were too bright to fall for it.
That's exactly
all Americans.
Right. That's exactly right. And it is time for all Americans of all colors, orientations, genders, whatever. We are one American people.
Amen.
And we need to understand the common problem that faces us all. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to grab a real quick phone call, and that's Analog Anarchist up in Maine. Aloha, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Check out Hispan TV on the satellite, also now being picked up by Press TV Iran. Civilians fired on at the bridge in Turkey, loud explosions in the capital. That's all. Go back to what you're doing.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's an ugly, ugly situation. Okay. During the commercial break, I was taking a look here, and no sign of mass coordinated Black Lives Matter protests taking place right now. They've got one scheduled for Palm Springs on Monday. York Police in York. There's one over in Britain on Sunday. These are just small little individual protests. So this day of rage just seems to have fizzled rather badly. Okay, do you have anything else?
Yes. A Canadian teacher is under police investigation for saying that Palestinians have the right to resist occupation. Now this, she's a Toronto area school board in Toronto City. police are investigating an elementary school teacher after a pro-Israel lobby complained about comments she made during a rally in solidarity with Palestinians. The gal is Nadia Shufani, and she addressed a downtown Toronto rally on 2 July, marking the Al-Quds Day, an annual event held around the world to support Palestinian rights and protest Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. Now, by any accounts, this was a completely peaceful demonstration, no violence whatsoever. And she made the statement, silence in situations of oppression and injustices is a crime against humanity. And she condemned the Israeli occupation and Israel's policies of home demolitions, land confiscations, and arrests of Palestinians. She also quoted Palestinian writer Ghassan Kanafani, an important figure of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who was assassinated by Mossad in 1972. And, Mike, it's become apparent to me that when it comes to support of Palestinians, Canadians have absolutely lost any freedom of speech they ever had.
Just like in France, just like here in the United States of America. I mean, the reality is all oppressed, occupied people have a natural right to resist. Okay. We even have that in our Declaration of Independence, when that long train of abuses and usurpations evincing a design to bring the people under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. For the government of Canada to come on out and make it a criminal offense to say an oppressed, targeted people have a right to resist their oppressors, I mean, that tells you how far gone into Israel's pocket the current government of Canada has gone.
Yeah, well, the gentleman who pushed the complaint, Mr. Moistin, it's interesting. People like him, I think, believe that the final solution to the Palestinian problem would be for every Palestinian to kill every one of their children and then kill themselves.
Well, you know, Newt Gingrich was saying today, there's plenty of other places for these people to go. Why do they want to cling to the place they've lived for the last 1,000 years? They're just being silly. All right, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here. I'm about to take my lady love to lunch, and we'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So have a good weekend. Stay in touch with what's going on here, and aloha, America.